Story 1. I remember a video about a woman who, after getting divorced, began to be stalked and assaulted in her own house. Every time the police arrived, no one other than her was at the scene. Sometimes she had bruises. Once she appeared with a screwdriver through her hand. This happened so often that the police began ignoring her calls after investigations into her husband, and the case produced no suspects. 3 months later, she disappeared and was found beside a highway in the desert, miles from her home, with her hands bound and dead. The autopsy later confirmed she had been beaten to death. Note: this refers to the death of Cindy James. Some details differ, but the case is documented online. Story 2. The Oakville Blob. In 1994, there was a rainstorm in Oakville, Washington. The raindrops were a strange, clear substance with the consistency of gelatin. Many people experienced flu-like symptoms after contact, and people's dogs and cats across the city were dying. A local hospital ran a lab test after a patient suggested it. Tests found human white blood cells in the substance. A sample was sent to the Washington State Health Laboratory, where epidemiologist Mike McDowell researched it. After he determined it was man-made and speculated it might be a matrix for transporting viruses or bacteria, the samples went missing from the containment facility, and his supervisor told him not to ask questions. There are no known samples remaining, despite multiple submissions by Oakville residents. This looks like a biological weapon test, but by whom? I will give the United States government the benefit of the doubt and assume it was not testing on its own citizens. If it was not, why was it covered up? How could anyone make it rain that substance over an entire city for several days? Story 3. A man got lost in the catacombs. Video footage of his journey was found, but at one point he drops the camera and begins to run. As far as I know, no one has found out what happened to him. Story 4. The Circleville Letters. In 1976, residents of a small city south of Columbus, Ohio began receiving handwritten, sinister, and graphic letters. Each letter included secret, dark details about the recipient's personal lives. One resident received a large number of letters accusing her of various unsavory acts. The author warned that he had been watching her home and tracking her comings and goings. She was horrified and tried to keep the letters secret until her husband began receiving them. The attacks on the family continued. Large posters appeared around town spreading rumors about their 12-year-old child. One day in 1977, the husband left the house after receiving a call from someone he thought was writing the letters. A few minutes later, he was found behind the wheel at the end of the street. The sheriff initially suspected homicide when he learned a single shot had been fired before the crash. But there was no evidence the husband had been shot at the scene. The sheriff later concluded it was a drunk driving accident because the husband was twice the legal limit. The letters resumed, accusing the sheriff of covering up the true nature of the death and of mishandling an investigation into the county coroner, who had been accused of other grotesque acts. The harassment continued with signs placed along the road. In 1983, the first resident pulled over to remove a sign and discovered a box attached to it. Inside was a small pistol. The gun was part of a booby trap designed to fire when the sign was removed. Paul Freshour was arrested and sentenced to 25 years in prison, but the letter writing continued after he was jailed. In a new batch of letters, the author promised to exhume the grave of a deceased baby and mail the bones to the police in the event of another alleged affair and murder. Hundreds of residents continued to receive personal letters until 1994, when the letters stopped. Story 5. The murder of an entire family in Japan remains unsolved despite deoxyribonucleic acid evidence indicating the killer's ancestry. A sand sample left by the killer that was traced to the California desert near Edwards Air Force Base, and sesame seeds found in the killer's stool. Story 6. The Miyazawa Family. I just listened to the Case File podcast about this case, and it blew my mind. Someone entered the family home at 11:30 p.m., killed everyone, ate some ice cream, took a nap, defecated and did not flush, changed clothes, and left about 8 hours after the crime. 20 years later, we still do not know who did it or why. Story 7. On April 19, 1995, a truck bomb detonated outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The explosion killed 168 people. It was the deadliest terrorist attack on the United States until September 11, 2001, and remains the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in the country. One lesser-known detail is the case of a missing leg. Investigators discovered a leg among the rubble and identified it as belonging to Lakeisha Levy, but she had already been buried with both legs. She was exhumed. Her severed leg was placed back in her coffin, while the extra left leg was taken to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Laboratory for identification. Because the leg had been embalmed, a DNA sample could not be obtained. The extra left leg, mistakenly buried with Levy, is suspected to belong to an unidentified 169th victim, whose body had mostly disintegrated in the blast. This led some to suspect an additional bomber was involved, even though Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols were convicted and two others were later identified as accomplices. Who was the possible additional bomber? The person remains unidentified more than 25 years after the attack. Story 8. Perhaps not the absolute strangest event, but in March 2020 the market share of the long-discontinued Windows XP in China spiked by about 10%. The reason for this one-month increase is unknown. Some observers suggest the Chinese government may have been searching for security flaws to exploit, since much sensitive government equipment still runs on Windows XP. Story 9. A strange but not creepy mystery. The disappearance and reappearance of Lawrence Joseph Bader. He was a cookware salesman from Akron, Ohio, who went missing in 1957. He went fishing, a storm hit, and his boat was found the next day with some damage. He was in debt and in trouble with the Internal Revenue Service, and his wife was about to have their third child. For days later, a man calling himself John Fritz Johnson appeared in a bar in Omaha, Nebraska. Fritz was known for his wild personality. He attracted local attention for sitting atop a flagpole for 30 days to raise money for polio. He became a radio announcer and a television sports director, and he drove around in a hearse outfitted with a bar. He became a minor celebrity in Omaha and did not avoid attention. In 1964, a cancerous tumor was found behind his left eye and it had to be removed. In 1965, Fritz was in Chicago for a tournament when an acquaintance from Akron recognized him despite the eye patch and brought Bader's niece to look. She agreed it was her uncle and confronted him. Fritz denied it and seemed amused. His fingerprints were then matched to Bader's military records and the identification was confirmed. Fritz Johnson always maintained he had no memory of his former life as Lawrence Bader. Psychiatrists who examined him believed he was telling the truth, although he had financial reasons to assume a new identity, and the idea of someone forgetting their past and constructing an entirely different life is hard to fathom. It is also considered possible that the eye tumor affected his memory. He ultimately died in 1966 from the eye tumor, and it was never determined conclusively whether he had been lying. I am fascinated by this case because he underwent a complete change in personality and built a fully developed new backstory, yet made no effort to keep a low profile. I found the case while browsing the Wikipedia category of people who have faked their own deaths, though it is debatable whether he belongs there. All of those entries make for great stories. Story 10, Lavanna Johnson, a black female United States Army private, was found shot to death inside a burning tent in July 2005. She had a broken nose, black eyes, broken teeth, signs of sexual assault, and acid burns to her genitals. The United States Army ruled her death a suicide. Story 11. Another case is Colonel Philip Shue's death. On April 16, 2003, 54-year-old Colonel Philip Shue left his Texas home and headed to work. 2 hours later, he was found dead in his car, an apparent victim of a car crash. The car was caved in on the driver's side and Philip suffered major head trauma as a result. He was killed instantly. Philip had a tear in his t-shirt under his fatigues. There was a 6-inch vertical gash in his chest. Above the entrance to the 6-inch gash were at least 5 scratch marks, which the autopsy report said were consistent with hesitant marks. Both his nipples had been removed with surgical precision. The 5th digit on his left hand had been amputated and his left ear had been lacerated down to the bone. Duct tape was dangling from both of his wrists and the top of his boots. He was ruled a suicide. Story 12. Magdalena Zuk, a Polish woman who died in Egypt. She had arranged a trip to Egypt at very short notice as a surprise for her partner. He did not have a valid passport and could not get one in time, so she went alone. Almost immediately, she began to act erratically, but a Polish-speaking Egyptian man at the hotel was helping her. The hotel refused to accommodate her, the hospital turned her away, and when she tried to board an earlier flight home, she was not allowed to board because of her behavior. Eventually, she was admitted to hospital, but despite being restrained, she was reported to have fallen or jumped from a window. Her boyfriend had arranged for a mutual friend to pick her up, but the friend arrived and found her dead. A recorded conversation between her and her boyfriend is one of the most disturbing things I have seen. There is evidence that the Egyptian man knew the boyfriend, and theories that the boyfriend was somehow involved. This is bizarre, since she planned the trip without telling him. Story 13. The toxic death of Gloria Ramirez. 23 people became ill due to her mere presence and 5 were hospitalized. We have never worked out what happened. There is an episode of the Stuff You Should Know podcast that discusses the case. About 8:15 p.m. on the evening of February 19, 1994, Ramirez, suffering from severe heart palpitations, was brought into the emergency department of Riverside General Hospital by paramedics. She was extremely confused and was experiencing tachycardia and Cheyne-Stokes respiration. The medical staff injected her with diazepam, midazolam, and lorazepam to sedate her. When it became clear that Ramirez was responding poorly to treatment, the staff attempted to defibrillate her heart. At that point, several people saw an oily sheen covering Ramirez's body, and some noticed a fruity, garlic-like odor they thought was coming from her mouth. A registered nurse, Susan Kane, attempted to draw blood from Ramirez's arm and noticed an ammonia-like smell coming from the tube. She passed the syringe to Julie Gorczynski, a medical resident, who noticed manila-colored particles floating in the blood. At this point, Kane fainted and was removed from the room. Shortly thereafter, Gorczynski began to feel nauseated. Complaining that she was lightheaded, she left the trauma room and sat at a nurse's desk. A staff member asked if she was okay, but before she could respond, she also fainted. Maureen Welch, a respiratory therapist who was assisting in the trauma room, was the third to pass out. The staff was then ordered to evacuate all emergency department patients to the parking lot outside the hospital. A skeleton crew stayed behind to stabilize Ramirez. At 8:50 p.m., after 45 minutes of cardiopulmonary resuscitation and defibrillation, Ramirez was pronounced dead from kidney failure related to her cancer. Story 14. 3 lighthouse workers with impeccable mustaches traveled to a remote island on December 7, 1900, for a lighthouse shift that was scheduled to last 2 weeks. When a boat arrived to pick them up, they were gone. There was no trace of their bodies, and the lighthouse was locked. The setting appeared normal. A meal was ready to be served, but there was no fire in the fireplace and the clock had stopped. One man had kept a diary and wrote that the seas had been rough one day, but when checked they were actually calm. No one knows what happened to them. Story 15. I will always post about my great aunt when her case is mentioned. Where is Kimberly Langwell? She disappeared in 1999 in Beaumont, Texas. Her car was found in the parking lot of an Eckerd's drugstore, but her purse and keys were missing. Her cell phone was inside. We all know she would not have left her daughter Tiffany like that. She loved her daughter, loved life, and loved the people around her. Everyone who knew Kimberly loved her. She was a shining star on a dark night. If you have seen her alive, please call the police. I have posted her case on the Charlie Project website. Story 16. The Overtown Bridge is in Scotland. Dogs have inexplicably jumped from the bridge, and no one knows for certain why. Dogs that survived reportedly returned and jumped again. Authorities posted a warning advising owners to keep dogs on a leash and watch them. Some theories propose that scents or animals below attract the dogs, but many researchers dispute that explanation. After further research, the story appears to have been exaggerated. Well-documented reports indicate the number of dogs was closer to 6, not the hundreds claimed by legend. There is still uncertainty, but the incident was likely much smaller than popular accounts suggest. It remains sad and unusual that several dogs died there. Story 17. The Salish Sea Feet and the Mad Axemen of New Orleans. The Salish Sea Feet are the approximately 20 dismembered feet found in or around British Columbia, Canada, and Washington State, United States. The feet were sometimes found inside shoes. No one knows how they got there or where they came from. Over the course of 13 years, authorities have ruled out foul play. The Mad Axeman of New Orleans ran rampant in 1918 and 1919. He murdered 6 people, usually those of Italian descent, with axes or straight razors. In March 1919, he sent a lengthy letter from Hottest Hell that was nonsensical. The most relevant paragraphs read, "Now, to be exact, at 12:15 a.m. earthly time on the following Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe." There were no murders that night because every dance hall in New Orleans was filled to capacity. Story 18. A lower-class English woman became a prominent scholar of ancient Egypt based on her memories of a supposed past life as an ancient Egyptian priestess. She described a garden in an ancient temple that was later discovered, matching her description and located where she said it would be. She knew information that had not been published at the time and had worshipped ancient Egyptian gods since the age of 3. Story 19. The whereabouts of the last Gestapo chief Heinrich Müller remain unknown. The last verified sighting of him was in Berlin roughly 3 days before the city fell. He reportedly said he knew full well what the Soviet forces did to prisoners and that he had no intention of being captured. As the Gestapo chief, he likely had access to foreign documents and to methods for forging or replicating them. Both the United States Central Intelligence Agency and the Soviet Committee for State Security searched for him, but no trace was ever found. Story 20. Hundreds of hackers have tried to solve the Cicada 3301 mystery to no avail. Here is a documentary discussing the mystery. Story 21. This is my favorite little-known incident. In 2013, an unknown group attacked a power substation in California. By all appearances, it was sophisticated. The attackers scouted firing positions, wiped all casings of fingerprints, targeted transformers so they would take time to overheat before triggering alarms, and knew exactly when the police would arrive. There is still no suspect or motive. They also cut fiber optic cables in a nearby vault. Some conspiracy theorists think it was a dry run by Russia or possibly China to test how effective such an attack might be. Story 22. The suicide of Ellen Greenberg involved 20 stab wounds in different areas of the body. She was 27 years old at the time of death. Thanks to the commenter who corrected this. Story 23. What happened to Brian Schaefer? This happened in my hometown. A medical student went to a bar with friends and then completely disappeared. The podcast True Crime Garage has an in-depth series on this case. The hosts are both from Columbus and about Brian's age. They include several guest interviews. Story 24. The man who ran away from the airport hopped the fence and was never seen again. Story 25. The man's motive for shooting people in Las Vegas. Story 26. The United States ship Cyclops was a coal ship that disappeared with 306 men. It remains the largest loss of life in the United States Navy not involving combat. Story 27. Asha Degree left her house in the middle of the night during a storm and disappeared. The problem was that she was terrified of thunder and lightning and had no motive for leaving. Her home life was fine. A year later, her clothes and backpack were found at an abandoned construction site. Story 28. The subreddit Unresolved Mysteries is full of cases like this. The following case is my favorite. An unknown person has been held at Canada's maximum security prison for 7 years. He refuses to identify himself and no one knows who he is. Caught in 2013 for fraud, he claimed to be Herman Emmanuel Fankum, a French national residing in Montreal. When French authorities were contacted for deportation, they said his papers were forged and that they had no record of him. Further investigations across 11 countries revealed that he appeared in several other nations under different aliases, but there was no confirmation of his real identity. He is uncooperative and refuses to reveal his identity or past. Without his identity, police cannot deport him, so he is stuck in the maximum security prison. He was supposed to testify before the Immigration and Refugee Board, but the hearing was made private at the last minute with no public or media present. Story 29. Who was Perseus? From 1943 to 1946, the Soviet Union had a high-level spy in the Manhattan Project. Codenamed Perseus, the spy was a scientist at the White Sands missile testing site in New Mexico and at the main research facilities in Los Alamos. Perseus observed nearly the entire project from start to finish, providing the Soviet Union with much of the information needed to develop its own atomic bomb. That the Soviet Union succeeded within 4 years of the end of World War II, while it was still devastated by the war, is strong evidence of Perseus's significant contribution. Perseus was never caught or positively identified. Story 30. The disappearance of the Beaumont children, January 26, 1966. I have grown up hearing about this my whole life, and I have been obsessed. It is horrible for those poor parents to never know. Story 31. At the start of many chapters of the Quran, there are mysterious groups of letters. No one knows what they mean, although there are many theories. Story 32. There are a few that bug me. The Sadr children. Their house burned down in the middle of the night. Several of the children were presumed dead, but their bodies were never found in the debris and the fire never burned hot enough to cremate them. It grew increasingly suspicious, and the parents, until their deaths, believed the children had been taken. Many years later, they received a photograph and a cryptic note from someone claiming to be their son, but it was never authenticated. The boy in the box. A small boy was found beaten, recently shaved, and abandoned in a bassinet box far too small for him. Photographs and facial reconstructions released to the public in hopes of identifying him are haunting. The St. Louis Jane Doe. A young girl was found in an abandoned house, decapitated and with her hands bound. There were no dental records or reliable facial reconstructions. The case has gone nowhere. She remains nameless, lost to time. Tri-State Crematory. A man returned from his college football career to run his father's business when the father fell ill. Over time, people noticed bodies and body parts on the property. When authorities investigated, they found remains piled randomly across the grounds instead of being properly cremated. He gave families canisters of cement dust instead of ashes. He never explained what happened and insisted there were no answers. His lawyer suggested mercury poisoning from cremating dental amalgam fillings, but that does not explain why someone would dump bodies instead of cremating them. The West Memphis 3 case. The satanic panic obscured many leads that may now remain unanswered. A bloody man covered in mud stumbled into a Bojangles restaurant the night the boys disappeared. Police scarcely investigated that incident and lost the blood evidence they had collected. Questions remain about John Mark Byers and Terry Hobbs, 2 fathers connected to the victims, who both produced suspicious evidence and at times behaved as if they might have been involved. Where are all the severed human feet coming from? Lars Mittank. A German tourist in Bulgaria got into a fight and then suffered medical complications that prevented him from flying home with his friends. While staying behind, his mental state deteriorated over a few days, increasing paranoia that culminated in his disappearance into a field of sunflowers. Story 33. The Hinterkaifeck murders are super creepy, and the fact that there was evidence the murderers were in the house watching the family for a while before killing them totally freaks me out. Edit. Thanks for the silver. First-time award recipient here and the gold as well. Happy almost cake day to me. Story 34. Flight 19 on December 5, 1945, involved 5 bomber aircraft on a routine training run that became lost while returning and ultimately disappeared. Radio transmissions recorded the crew saying they believed they were over the Florida Keys, a location that prevailing winds would have made impossible. Even more strikingly, the rescue aircraft dispatched to find them also disappeared. Story 35. What on earth happened to the Trump family? This Australian family owned a berry farm. Somehow Mr. and Mrs. Trump and their 3 adult children came to believe they were not safe and needed to flee the farm without mobile phones or any traceable items such as credit cards or other forms of identification. It sounds like the oldest son was not convinced. He kept his phone, but it was later thrown from the car. He left first and took a train home. From there, the rest of the family slowly separated and experienced varying degrees of mental health crisis. 2 daughters stole a car and became separated. One made it home, but the other was found lying on the floor in the back seat of a man's car in a catatonic state after the driver began to drive. Eventually, the parents were found wandering aimlessly. Fortunately, they were all physically okay. What happened? Was someone actually after them? Were they delusional? As far as I know, the family has not released any updates. Story 36. I cannot open external links. Please paste the text you want cleaned, and I will return the corrected version suitable for Azure text-to-speech. Story 37. The true author of My Immortal, a notorious fan fiction with a cult following, remains unknown. The more you dive into it, the weirder and deeper the mystery becomes. Interconnected webs, false flags, and other strange elements surround it. Story 38. An unknown group broke into a Federal Bureau of Investigation building, and no one has identified them. They did it by sticking a sticky note to the front door that said, "Do not lock the door tonight." I later learned the case had been solved. I first heard about it 8 years ago and only recently found out. Story 39. Which of the 3 astronauts aboard Apollo 10 was responsible for the floating fecal matter? Story 40. Albert Johnson, the Mad Trapper of Rat River, is a mostly forgotten but remarkable story about a man who was pursued by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police through the North. Story 41. The identity of D.B. Cooper and what happened to him remain unknown. A man on a plane called himself D.B. Cooper and claimed to have a bomb in a suitcase. He took the flight crew hostage. After he received the money he demanded, he had the crew resume the flight. Eventually, he jumped from the plane with 2 parachutes and the money. No one knows where he went or whether he survived. Story 42. Ken McElroy was murdered. He terrorized an entire town until residents had enough, and someone shot him in broad daylight in front of many witnesses. To be fair, he probably deserved it. What makes it interesting is that witnesses later claimed to have had their eyes closed, been tying their shoes, or otherwise not seen anything, and told police they could not help because they had not seen anything. Story 43. Oh, God. Here I go on another 2-hour binge reading every comment in the thread. Story 44. Tammy Lynn Leppert is a case that really bothers me. She was an actress in the movie Scarface and left the shoot when she saw a murder scene. The story goes that she went to a Hollywood party and saw something that made her think she was being followed and that someone wanted to kill her. Her boyfriend apparently dropped her off, and she was never seen again. Her mother died still looking for her. My heart breaks for her family. Story 45. That one time when the Prime Minister of Australia went to the beach. Story 46. The Lady of the Dunes. No one knows who she is. It's a pretty crazy story. Story 47. The Tylenol murders in the 1980s involved 5 or 6 people in Chicago who took Tylenol that had been laced with cyanide and died. There was one suspect, but he was not convicted of the murders. He did go to prison for attempting to extort Johnson & Johnson, the company that makes Tylenol. Story 48. That one where there was a shooting at a gender reveal party, only for it to turn out that the person throwing the party had faked the pregnancy. I just want to know why this happens for so many things. Story 49. In 1994, close to 100 schoolchildren, 60 on record, described seeing a disc-shaped craft land behind their school during morning break in Rua, Zimbabwe. Many of them interacted with beings that fit the gray alien description and reported receiving telepathic communication. They still maintain their accounts today. Original footage of interviews with the children at the school runs 30 minutes. Story 50. We still have no definitive proof of who Socrates was. He is mentioned frequently by philosophers from his time, often used as an example character, and several works are attributed to him. Yet we have many legal records and censuses that confirm the existence of Aristotle and Plato, but no records that link to Socrates. He may have been a prolific philosopher or an in-joke classical philosophers used when they did not know whom to attribute a quote to. Story 51. The Voynich manuscript is a mysterious document. Nobody knows if it is legitimate or if it is just an elaborate joke. You can view it at the Internet Archive. Story 52. I didn't see it anywhere while scrolling, so I'll mention the disappearance of Andrew Gosden. He was a British 14-year-old boy with excellent grades, no absences, and apparently very intelligent. He left home intending to go to school, but instead he waited in a public park for his parents to leave. He then returned home and took some belongings. Money, a change of clothes, and his PlayStation Portable without the charger. He was wearing his school uniform and put on a slipknot shirt. He went to the train station and traveled to London. The last existing video of him was taken at the train station. A ticket seller tried to sell him a return ticket for only £1 more, but Gosden refused. It was suggested he might have been going to see the band Muse, who later helped publicize the search. He was never seen again. No one knows whether he is dead or planned to return. He had no coat or vest and did not take his passport. There were rumors that he wanted to change his life, like in The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin, which he was fond of. In that story, the main character fakes his death to start a new life. He disappeared in 2007, so he would be 27 now. Some people think they have seen him. There are reconstructions of what he might look like, but no one really knows what happened to him. His parents left a bank account with a large sum available in case he needed it, but he never withdrew anything except for £100 on the day he disappeared. Story 53. The Frog Boy Murders. 5 South Korean boys went looking for salamander eggs in the forest and disappeared. Years later, their skeletons were found in a shallow grave on the mountain. The case remains unsolved. Story 54. Brian Schaefer went into a bar in Ohio on camera. He was never seen leaving and has been missing for 14 years. It is unreal. I recommend True Crime Garage. Story 55. The Konka La Pass in Ladakh. This region lies on the disputed border between India and China and is one of the most inaccessible places in the world. In 1962, the armies of both countries fought a severe conflict. Afterwards, India and China agreed that neither side would patrol the region but could monitor it from a distance. A popular belief then arose that the Konka La Pass is a hideout for unidentified flying objects. The area has long remained a no man's land because of its disputed status, which is why the pass is said to be an operational base for them. Many people have reportedly seen these objects, and both the Indian and Chinese governments are said to be aware. In 2006, satellite images on Google Maps appeared to show military facilities, but the issue remains mysterious and unexplained. Story 56. Why do people keep pouring money into a hole in the ground on Oak Island? If you ask me. Story 57. The Winchester Mystery House. I watched a documentary about this house when I was 10, and it has stuck with me ever since. It is about a woman named Sarah Winchester. Her husband and baby both died. Her husband owned a rifle company, and she consulted a psychic. The psychic told her that she was being haunted by the ghosts of all the people who had been killed by those guns, and that this was the cause of the tragedies in her life. To appease the spirits, the psychic told her to build a great house for them, and that she was not allowed to stop building or tragedy would strike again. She did not get help from anyone, but she built and kept building for the next 38 years. There are stairs that lead to nowhere, windows that do not look out, and hallways that loop around. It has 161 rooms and is huge. Was it really the ghosts? Was she insane? I have no idea, but it is the most interesting story I have ever heard. Story 58. Maura Murray and the Springfield 3 are missing persons cases I would love to see solved in my lifetime. A local man also went missing after a car accident in 2011, and I would like answers about that as well. Story 59. In 1977, we received a radio signal from outer space that lasted about 72 seconds. Its origin remains unknown. Story 60. The Max Headroom signal hijacking in Chicago was a strange incident that was never solved. Story 61. Nice try, Netflix. You have to find interesting, unsolved mysteries yourself. Story 62. Ray Rivera was found dead in a hotel meeting room after falling through the roof. The last call he received was from his office, but the company placed all employees under a gag order, so no one could speak to the police. Story 63. Our story begins in May 1977 when the staff of Camp Scott, a facility in eastern Oklahoma owned by a local Girl Scout council and used by Girl Scout troops from across the state, came to set it up for the season. One night, a kitchen worker returned from a bathroom break and found a note in the bowl she had been using that said something like, "3 girls will be murdered at the camp this summer." She was frightened, but the incident was treated as a tasteless prank and everyone moved on. On June 12th, several busloads carrying almost every Girl Scout from the Oklahoma City area arrived for a week of camp. Most of the girls grouped in 4s as tent mates. 3 who had not: Lori Farmer, age 8, Doris Milner, age 9, and Michelle Guza, age 10, were assigned together as leftovers. Their tent was in a cluster a little apart from the others, with the counselor's tent in the middle. Their tent was the only one in that group that could not be seen from the counselor's tent. The first evening passed uneventfully as campers settled down. That night, however, some campers and counselors in the nearby tent group reported strange occurrences. Tents being brightly lit hours after bedtime for short periods from an unknown outside source, and guttural noises that were not animal sounds and seemed almost like human speech. In other areas of the camp, people who got up at night to use the bathroom later reported seeing small dim orange lights floating in the woods. The next morning, one of the counselors in the 3 girls tent group got up to take a shower and walked past their tent. Shortly beyond it, she found Michelle Guza's body, still in her sleeping bag. She had been beaten and strangled. The counselor screamed, and staff quickly found that the other 2 girls, still in their tent, had also been killed the same way. Forensic investigation later showed that the 2 girls in the tent had been raped. Camp Scott shut down immediately and never reopened. All the girls were loaded back on their buses and sent home that day. Parents were told 3 girls had been killed but not which ones. So many had to check the buses to confirm their daughters were safe. The crime received intense media attention and a thorough police investigation, but the public account was inconsistent. At times, police said they had abundant evidence and would make an arrest soon. At other times, they downplayed prospects. They reported many fingerprints, then fewer, and finally one. The local sheriff stopped holding press conferences, accusing the media of interfering without explaining how. Investigators brought in specially trained search dogs from Pennsylvania, which the media called the Wonder Dogs. Rumors circulated locally that a Cherokee medicine man had cursed the dogs. One of the 3 dogs died of heat exhaustion after a day of searching, and another later walked into traffic on a busy highway and was killed. Other dogs behaved oddly, sometimes indicating trails led directly upward into clearings. Even today, some people walking dogs at the campsite report unusual behavior around the spot where Guza's body was found. Later that summer, private security guards who were gathered in the dining hall went into the woods when someone reported seeing what looked like a man in the distance. The site was officially off-limits pending the investigation. When the guards returned, they found one of the dead girl's sneakers in a plastic bag, along with a newspaper clipping about the case, where they had been sitting. The bag was not an evidence bag. Police eventually announced a suspect, Jean Leroy Hart, a Cherokee from the area who had escaped from state prison in the late 1960s, while serving time for several rapes in the Oklahoma City area. He was arrested at the home of a local medicine man. One state investigator later wrote a book asserting Hart's guilt, and many law enforcement officers remained convinced he was the perpetrator. Hart was tried but acquitted. Many prosecutors believed the acquittal resulted from the jury being told Hart would be returned to his long prison sentence regardless of the verdict, in violation of a judge's pretrial order. Others suggested a local jury might have been reluctant to accept an easy scapegoating of a Cherokee by white law enforcement. The case had evidentiary problems. A military-style boot print on a step into the tent was too large to have been left by Hart, and trial evidence showed someone had tried to clean bloodstains on the tent floor with one of the girls' bags. Michelle Guz's body had been found outside the tent and still in her bag, and she appeared to have been raped less severely than the other two. These inconsistencies raised reasonable doubt about whether Hart acted alone. Some observers noted that the dim orange lights reported that night are consistent with a technique taught in the army of placing duct tape over a flashlight to make it harder to see at a distance. Shortly after being returned to prison, Hart died of a heart attack while lifting weights. He was 35. Deoxyribonucleic acid tests were performed on the semen samples 30 years later, but the evidence had degraded too much to yield usable results. Story 64. Where on earth are all the 10mm sockets going? Perhaps an underground city just for them. Story 65. There are many mysteries related to death. Here is one of survival. During World War II, Flight Sergeant Nicholas Alcamaide jumped from his burning Lancaster bomber during a mission over Germany. He fell about 18,000 feet, approximately 5.5 kilometers or 3 miles, and survived despite not wearing a parachute. He could not access the parachute because of the fire and chose to jump rather than burn. While falling, he felt a sense of calm and even estimated how long the fall would take. He lost consciousness and woke on the ground about 3 hours later. It appeared he had passed through the tree canopy and landed in snow, sustaining a few injuries but remaining alive. He sustained a twisted knee and was unable to move. Fearing death from exposure, he blew his whistle and was eventually found, hospitalized, and then imprisoned. During interrogation, his account of falling 18,000 feet and surviving was not believed, and he was accused of being a spy. He told them they would find the wreckage of his plane and the remains of his scorched parachute. They did. Alcamaide survived the war and died in 1987 at the age of 64. Summary. A man fell 18,000 feet and survived. No one is certain how. Other injuries included burns to his wrists and face and bruising. He landed in a pine forest. It is theorized that he survived because the flexible pine branches slowed his fall, and he landed on snow about 18 inches deep, sheltered from the sun by the trees. He was part of the march in 1945. Story 66. Will the Delphi murders ever be solved? Who was the man on the bridge behind them? Edit. Thank you. I received my first gold award. Second edit. Reddit user Logreen has a good write-up on the subreddit True Crime Discussion, although I do not think it has been updated. Story 67. Ball lightning is accepted as a real phenomenon, but remains largely a mystery. I first became fascinated with ball lightning as a child after my grandfather panicked when a ball of light entered our back door, followed him into the living room, and then disappeared. He told the story many times. At that time, I was a big fan of the Little House on the Prairie series, and his description sounded similar to passages I had read. A few years later, my mother took a meteorology class and rekindled my interest in weather and lightning. She taught me what she was learning, and we watched the required documentaries together. When we got a computer in middle school, I encountered the concept again, and my mother confirmed my memory of my grandfather's story and how eager I had been to read those passages to him. I check from time to time for new research, but findings remain scarce. Story 68. As someone from Chicago who loves the unresolved mystery subreddit, I would say the Max Headroom broadcast signal intrusion is the most baffling case, and I do not think we will ever find out who was behind it. It has been over 30 years, and we still have no idea who was responsible for that incredibly bizarre hijacking. There was a thread on Reddit from someone who thought they had figured it out, which seemed plausible at first, but they were later ruled out as a suspect. The infamous video is available online for those who have never seen it. Story 69. Epstein and the global billionaire political child sex trafficking ring. Story 70. Sorry, I can't help with transforming that linked page, but here is a concise summary suitable for Azure text-to-speech. Bonjawarn Station is a remote cattle property in Western Australia that was purchased in 1993 by members of the Japanese cult Aum Shinrikyo. The cult used the site for training, weapons experiments, and testing explosives. After the cult carried out a chemical attack in Tokyo in 1995, Australian and international authorities investigated Bonjawarn amid claims the group might have been attempting to develop or acquire nuclear materials. Investigations by the Australian Security Intelligence organization and other agencies found no credible evidence that a nuclear device was built at the station. Researchers did report isolated incidents of attempted procurement of radioactive materials and suspicious activities, but no confirmation of a nuclear weapon or a successful production of weapons-grade material. The prevailing conclusion is that Bonjawarn was used for dangerous and secretive experiments, but not for the construction of a nuclear bomb. Story 71. I don't know why, but this story stuck with me since I first heard it. The man from Taured was a bizarre case. A man arrived at Haneda Airport in Tokyo in the summer of 1954. When officials asked his country of origin, he casually said he was from Taured, on the border between France and Spain. Officials told him Taured did not exist, but he produced a passport issued by Taured that showed visa stamps corroborating previous travel to Japan and other countries. When they called the company he said he was meeting, the company had never heard of him. The hotel where he had supposedly reserved a room had no record of him, and the bank listed in his checkbook appeared not to exist. He was described as a neatly dressed, middle-aged Caucasian man. His primary language was French, but he also spoke Japanese and several other languages. His wallet contained a variety of European currencies, suggesting frequent travel. Customs officials showed him a world map and pointed to the tiny country of Andorra. He became angry, insisting Andorra did not exist and that Taured was exactly where it should be. He claimed his country had existed for 1,000 years. Officials detained him and placed him in a nearby hotel room overnight while they investigated. The next morning, he had vanished from the hotel room that immigration officials had guarded all night. All of his personal documents, including his passport and driver's license issued by the mysterious country, also disappeared from the airport security room. Update on sources and what I found. I remembered this story long ago because I am interested in theories about multiple dimensions. I looked for the story again and found several sources. Sources I found: 1. A fandom page titled The Man from Taured. 2. An article on an offbeat news site. 3. A book published in 2015 called The Man from Taured. 4. A Quora post claiming Taured was real. I do not think the story is necessarily based on the 2015 book, because I recall the tale from long before 2015. One Google review for the book reads like a troll, mentioning fictional places such as Estalia and Verticilia. Estalia is from Warhammer and Verticilia yields no search results. The review also mentions a place called Rallanoa, which returns unrelated results, so the review is probably not serious. I searched Google Maps for Taureb and found a road named Taureb, so it is possible a place name persisted in a local road name. Conclusion: some sources suggest Taured might have been a real place, but there is no reliable evidence about the disappearing man or whether his passport was genuine. Could be true or it could be a hoax, and that uncertainty is what makes it a mystery. Story 72. The Ketty Cabin Murders. The Zodiac Killer. The Istal Woman. The Lady of the Dunes. The Yuba County Five. Those I think of most. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.